Hi, Dr. Sawyer. Can you hear us?
Yes, I
Perfect.
can.
Awesome.
Right. We have visual, we have audio.
We do indeed.
Okay, it's a great honor to be speaking with this group today. I'm not sure how I got so lucky, but somebody found me and we connected. So, and in this age of remote everything, it seems to work well. But thank you for the opportunity. I hope to get to know some of you more on an individual basis. Seth, I hope you have a rear view mirror because something's approaching you that looks pretty ominous. But let's see if I can share my screen and we'll jump into what our mission is today. Is that working? All righty, thank you very much. And please jump in any time, organizers, if you need me to wind it down, etc. And I'll just keep talking. You guys have this great waiting room that doesn't have a doorbell like my telemedicine platform. So that's actually very nice. Okay, I'm at UCSF. I think you heard a very generous overview of my background, and thank you for that. I am no longer the Chief Health Innovation Officer for Trish, although I did do that for the last couple of years. And I've switched over to complete a project I'm very, very interested in. You'll hear a tiny bit about at the end, building out a health sense matrix for space. So I shifted my roles with Trish to a PI right now. I am the director at the UC Space Health Program, so University of California, although I know there are other UCs, especially as we talk to people across the country. So I don't want to claim we're the only UC system. But in case it's not familiar, University of California. And so I'm going to present today on ocean rowing and the sea of health and medical considerations in that, and also why I consider ocean rowing an analog for terrestrial as well as space medicine, and how we can learn lessons across. I do consider it an edge case or a forcing function for many of the remote medical capabilities we're trying to develop for our own patients in our own healthcare systems. So just to jump in, I want to lead with a moment of reverence and in memoriam for two ocean rowers we lost in the last year, which is very, very, very unusual. But just to set the stage, Angela Madsen was a phenomenal person and really a paraparetic individual who had done many extremely hard endurance events and was set out to solo row across the Pacific. She had done it in a pair before and was lost in June. And Ruhan Yu had tried many different ocean attempts and found unfortunate circumstances in November of 2019. And it was only in really 4 or 5 months later that his boat eventually washed ashore. So this is a great sadness. It's not common, but happened to be in a very compressed amount of time and individuals that my community was in contact with. So we're going to go through coverage for ocean rowers on the medical side, how I became an expedition medic, common ocean rower considerations, some uncommon ones, and then how I feel like ocean rowing can help us advance what I'm now calling augmented to autonomous health and medical management, or A to A self-health and medical management. First of all, my becoming an expedition medic for ocean rowing, which happened more than 15 years ago now, was one of those unintended consequences of trying to do something good. When I saw a fundraising request, my neighbor was having an ocean rower speak who was trying to raise money for her own next crossing. And I attended that. And I'll tell you how the downstream went from that. First, I'd like to take a moment, if you can bear with me, to switch in and out of YouTube. I'd like to just show you a brief video of Roz Savage, and this is on her Atlantic crossing. The reason is it sets the stage, it gives you, quote, an immersion into ocean rowing. So let me just play that for you if you don't mind.
I'm stuck on the sea anchor. I can't go anywhere. The trip line to the sea anchor, first of all, failed, then snapped, and there is no way that I can pull in a para anchor with a ton of seawater in it. Basically, I've got to crawl out over the roof of the forward cabin with a knife and cut off the sea anchor line. Big waves. There are sharks out there. I'm quite scared.
Sawyer, I don't think the video is playing for us on this end.
All right. I hope that played okay and you were able to hear her commentary. Let me just do a quick check-in on that. Were you able to hear her description of what was going on?
We weren't able to see the video play, unfortunately. I think you need to change the screen that you're sharing.
Please speak up when there's some sort of a problem, because I didn't mean to waste your time with that. Let's keep going.
It's okay.
I apologize. So that meant nothing to you. Okay, let's just keep going. But if you have some sort of a technical problem, speak up right away. No, I don't want to waste your time.
I just think you need to, like the screen that we're sharing, looking at is like frozen.
That's okay. We'll keep going now. If I can actually make this play. Are you able to see the next slide now?
Yes, that looks good.
So what that video was, and sorry, I if there's time at the end, we'll play it, was really Roz. Did you hear the sound and no video, or none of it?
We heard the sound, yeah.
Okay, so Roz actually had to climb out on the bow of her boat to undo the sea anchor, which is the only way that they can stabilize the boat when they're trying to rest. It's a big drogue, a parachute-like device that fills with water about 1,000 pounds and helps stabilize the direction of the boat while they're trying to rest. For the solo rowers, it's critical. Anyway, her sea anchor retrieval line got stuck. She had to go out and actually cut the line, or she would have been sitting there till she died. So in the process of doing that, it was extremely dangerous. You could see her sliding off the side of the boat. You could see her trying to climb back on. And all of those are conditions in which the rower's life is in danger. And particularly, you might have noticed, or I would have pointed out, that she had no tethering line on, which is something we brought into our discussions when I came on board as expedition medic. So I'll send you a link to that, because that will give you a good context. Basically, Roz is the first woman to solo row the 3 major oceans of the world. And she's got a talk on the World Extreme Medicine site. If you're not members of that, it's a fantastic organization. In 2018, she gave a great talk. It's worth looking up the link. She's very much an environmentalist. She's an author. She's written several books. And she also is a life changer, and of course, influenced me heavily in this process. I met her giving a talk. She looked like this, but as she gave the talk, she was showing pictures of herself across the Atlantic. And most ocean rowers do carry lots of cameras. And it's tricky because many get damaged, but most have GoPros mounted different places. And I point that out from an interest standpoint so they can share their experience, but also because we could be gathering and quantifying medical and health information off of that. And as we're layering AI into most things we're doing, we're looking more and more at that footage. So here's how I met Ross, fully recovered from her Atlantic row and giving a talk raising money for the Pacific row. But here's a picture of her on the Atlantic row. And you can see the tremendous weight loss, the cachexia. And here's a really good example of the cachexia and weight loss. And so when I saw this, I was quite struck by the tremendous strain on her body, the net negative caloric balances, all of those things. And as the director of the Skeletal Health Service and an orthopedist, I also knew what was happening to her underlying bone structure, as I used to run an eating disorders program. And this is really a profound picture on the outside that tells you a lot about what's going on in the inside. And so I said that I had a few questions after the presentation. Some were about safety, the tethering. I was really struck by this loss of weight and really wanted to talk about the impact of that on her performance, safety, survival, long-term health effects, and had she had any fractures. She was quite surprised by my questions and felt as if I could actually see through her. So she indeed had never told anyone about her fractures once returning to land, et cetera. So she asked me one question, which was, would I be your expedition medic? And that truly was a threshold moment for me. It's accelerated my career in many directions. You can imagine bone health, you can imagine my sports medicine career, but also really in remote medical management and pushing the envelope for this distributed healthcare model that I think we should be striving for. This is a sport I'm going to give you some background on. It's got a very rich and interesting history, but it's a really small, eclectic group of people. But it really started way back in 1896, this ocean rowing, unsupported ocean rowing expedition model. And a pair crossed over the Atlantic in 1896, but the first solo crossing wasn't until some 70 years later in 1969 when John Fairfax crossed. And that cross actually from Canary Islands over to Antigua is still really the most famous Atlantic rowing race that there is. So these are just examples of the progression of ocean rowing over time. One of the most famous rowers was Peter Bird, and you'll hear more about him in a second. And then early into this, Kathleen and Curtis Seville became a pair that rowed across the Atlantic. And Kathleen was really the first woman ocean rower, ocean crosser. So there's this organization. I'm giving you information in case this piques your interest and you want to dive more into this. And this gentleman, Kenneth Crutchlow, founded this, and he and his wife ran this for many years. He's since passed away, but they actually established the world records for ocean rowing. And also they are the gatekeepers really for the Guinness World Records around ocean rowing. It comes into play because not only do they certify the rows, but they set up policies for certification that I am in conflict with sometimes in terms of rower safety. And we can talk more about that later. But basically, I think one of the things people always ask is, why do people do this? I think Kenneth had a phrase, not his own, but that he used to use, the nos te ipsum, know thyself, know yourself, test yourself, challenge yourself, and succeed is the greatest victory for any individual. And that's what this is all about for most rowers. I think back around to Peter Bird, I got to work with his son, Louis Bird. But here's Peter, who made many ocean crossings, but he also made 5 attempts to row the Pacific west to east, which is one of the most difficult crossings there is, and across the North Pacific. So I'm working with a rower right now, Leah Ditton, who plans to row from Japan to the Golden Gate Bridge in 2 years. And I worked with the 2 men who successfully did it as a pair, Chris Martin and Mick Dawson, and you'll see them later. It's very challenging, and unfortunately, that was the last row that Peter did and lost his life on that attempt. His son Louis was 5 years old at the time, and Louis went on to row the Pacific in the other direction later. So many of these rowers really are like other extreme adventurers, including those who do really heroic things in military service, in NASA service, but also on their own for extreme adventure. And so I won't read through all of these, but what's happened more and more is they go out against the elements, but now they're able to leverage technologies. And so the ocean rowers are leveraging water makers where it used to be, and just to clarify, they can only take so much fresh water. So they've got to desalinate to survive. And a hand pump won't keep up with their losses, the combined incidental losses, sweat losses, urine losses, et cetera. So they use electric water pumps. Those are powered by batteries and solar energy. But again, you can imagine how the salt water fouls the electronics on board. And so sometimes they lose those water makers functionally. They're down to the hand pump. We have to do all kinds of calculations about survivability with rationing of water and renal insufficiency that starts to develop, et cetera. There have been long-term irreversible renal failure cases reported in rowers. So it's very critical. And then also many of them are now using sat phones, and you can imagine with all the CubeSats and everything going up, the satellite coverage has gotten better, but it's still spotty across the ocean. So as the medical management person, it becomes a challenge where we're working with synchronous plus asynchronous communication. There are those who are leveraging EPIRBs, emergency responders, and beacons to let other ships see them, because they are only 6 by 23 feet generally. And so large ships in the ocean can't see them very well until they're on top of them. And imagine these rowing boats are not very maneuverable, nor are the giant cargo ships. So most of them leverage these things. However, there are rowers going out now trying to recreate early challenges of being minimalists and going out with absolutely no technology. And so this is adding to our our stress as the expedition medics. But again, we would do all we can to support them in terms of preparation, self-training, or training them to be self-powered in terms of medical management, and really the best we can do in terms of making contingency plans for rescues, et cetera, if needed. So this organization's been very valuable, particularly around record keeping. And this is a really important thing to improve safety and any kind of medical understanding of the physiologic responses to the stresses they're under. We do need more data. They've done record keeping for records, but for setting records, but not enough emphasis on health and medical information and a database to support that. So if someone in your group is interested, this is something we badly need, and I'd love to work more with people on this. There are many, many lessons we can get from this group of individuals, and actually many of them really willing to pilot and do science while they're out there, much like astronauts are. Fewer people have rowed across an ocean and have been to space. There are about 400 now. It's become one of those sports, though, where it's starting to expand. Fewer than 20% are women, but that's also been increasing. There are some very well documented problems. Weight loss is one, change in body comp. Now more knowledge is happening around bone loss. More people are interested in doing pre and post DEXAs. But very little is reported in terms of post-row stress fractures, et cetera. So we need a lot more research and record keeping. And there are really not any standards or qualifying agencies for the boat or the rower from a medical standpoint, or for the medical team supporting them. So here's some common risks and some strategies around them. First of all, let's look at the ocean rowboat. They're not all alike. They're certainly not all ready, which means there's a varying degree of preparedness, not just of the human, the rower, but also of their craft. And this is really challenging for the expedition medic. But basically, as you know, they're facing backwards. So their back is to the bow, their face is to the stern. They have hatches on both ends. One is typically dedicated for storage if it's a solo rower, and the other for sleeping and daily hygiene and food prep. However, when you have pairs, or sometimes triplets, or sometimes quads, you can imagine those hatches get used to the max. They also have under deck storage capabilities, which is used for both storage and ballast. I'll talk about that a little bit later. This is a picture of the Great Pacific Race. Chris Martin, who was one of the first men to ever row from Japan to the Golden Gate Bridge, I mentioned earlier. He and Roz Savage started this Great Pacific Race from Monterey to Hawaii, and I was the medical director for all of its crossings. That's now been taken over by a group in San Francisco, so you might hear about a launch this summer that we're working with. And one of the things that's a little confusing is if you look at this, you can see that depending on which way the wind is going, if this hatch were made, the back hatch here were made taller, that could be actually a face to the wind and become advantageous. And in fact, there are boats now being designed like that, where the bow is low, the stern is high, and they're called blow boats. And some people feel like they need their own category because it gives the rower a distinct advantage. The World Ocean Rowing Society is so strict that I created a bimini for Roz when she was doing a crossing where it would take her across the equator. The temperatures were extreme, tons of water loss if we didn't get shade on her. So I created a bimini for her, and they went round and round as to whether she could cheat and use that as a sail. So it's sometimes challenging, as any one of you in sports medicine knows, that sometimes you actually have to be the representative and the advocate for the health and medical side up against maybe the coach, maybe the society, maybe the record-setting agency. And oftentimes we are getting rowers presenting to us, especially in the races where they pay a fee to register and they're going in an organized group, that just really aren't the right stuff. And I'm not going to name any names, but we have individuals, I've had individuals show up who had bilateral knee replacements, who had chronic lung infections, who had hemophilia. That was a very interesting challenge. And you have to figure out and get a good sense of the underlying substrate, because you can do all your prep as the medical coordinator, all the training in the world, but some of it comes down to substrate. And some of that substrate really can be sorted out on a history and physical. And some of it is, as you can imagine, mental, psychological, etc. And some is just wits. How good are you at adapting and creating in order to survive? So this is just another example of what rowers look like when they come in. And this is a rower who was on a world record setting quad boat. And they typically lose a significant amount of body weight. Roz would lose over 30 pounds. She was only 5'2" and is only 5'2" and would lose at least 30 pounds every row, which is significant for her. But they're almost always running a negative caloric and hydration balance, which is severely compromises performance, but again, can have long-term consequences. And so this is something where I feel like we need to do a lot more scientific and precision approach to nutrition and hydration. Same concepts I'm trying to work on with astronauts at this time. And here's an example, though, of how much food it actually takes. So these are all freeze-dried packets that are all going to go into one rowboat. They burn a tremendous amount of calories, so it's very, very hard for them to keep up. And on the longer, and they can only take so much food. Water, as I said, they can desalinate, but the food sources, there is a finite amount to that. We have created systems where some rowers, especially for the longer rows, like 5 months, where we created sprout growing canisters, et cetera. But this nutritional thing where we have to create more and more nutrient dense foods and figure out the right energy balance assessments, as well as compensatory mechanisms. So here's an example of that. There are disruptors in the field. This couple, you might recognize Sammy and Meredith Loring, who they founded Trulia originally. In fact, it went public while they were in the middle of the ocean. So they not only got an ocean record, but they also made millions of dollars all in one summer. But then they started a company called Virta, which you might be familiar with. And that's a company addressing diabetes with incorporating a physician model, but into an app and behavioral sciences and remote medical tracking. And it's quite a successful company. All of it based, though, on a very specific ketogenic diet. And this is not a diet I recommend for athletes who have not been on it for a long period of time leading up to the event, because it can be severely stressful to people who aren't used to it. Meredith and Sammy had been on it for a long time. In fact, a week before Meredith, she arrived a week late to the launch of this, because she had just run the Himalayan marathon. So we held her back to gain weight and hydrate, et cetera, before we put her out on the ocean. But needless to say, they were used to the diet. They knew what they could and couldn't do on it. They also changed how they did the rowing. Most pairs will row 2 hours on, 2 hours off. We call it 2 up and 2 down. They changed the model. They rowed together. They slept together. I think they actually created their next child on the row as well. And they slept 8 hours a night, and they maintained excellent hygiene. So they disrupted a lot of the folklore in ocean rowing. They also had a boat that was somewhat classified as a blow boat, but they blew apart a record. And I think they crossed in 45 days from Monterey to Hawaii, and came in almost at the same weight as they left. So blew apart the model that you have to lose a ton of weight. So I'm just putting that out there as an exception, but showing us that we need to do more disruption in the sport and in our recommendations. So sorry, this is the company in case people want to look it up. I'm not promoting a ketogenic diet, but this has been well validated in certain populations, particularly in certain diabetic patients. But in general, I think that there's more research going on about it, and it's just an example of, thank goodness we're getting more disruptors in the field. But dehydration is an enormous problem. It comes from seasickness, and seasickness affects almost every single rower, particularly in the first 2 weeks. People do tend to adapt to a moving horizon. You've got to retrain your neurovestibular inputs and your response to it, because you've got responses where you're sensing certain things and you're seeing other things. And it's very disturbing, makes some people extremely sick, Problem is, they get nausea and vomiting, they can't eat or drink, they can't keep up with what we call the sip and stretching breaks. And especially when they're cold, the rowers, when you're cold, you don't sense the fact that you're still sweating and losing lots of water. So we actually put people on a clock. By the time they're thirsty, they're way behind on hydration. This has been shown in several different athletic models. So we really need to get better at sensing hydration, and it's going to be a multi-parametric algorithm that really does a good job on sensing hydration, but also the type of hydration and replacement that's needed. This seasickness thing is a big problem, though, as it leads to dehydration. Then dehydration takes over and becomes the stimulus for nausea and vomiting, and it makes it hard to rehydrate these rowers. And that is a very big problem. So I've actually developed a method where we are doing capabilities of rectal rehydration, which was a little bit shocking to some of the rowers and some of my own medical colleagues. But the truth is, when you have no other way to get the fluids in and keep them down, that is an option. And it's actually an option that seems to be more doable than trying to train rowers on a moving boat to start an IV. And I'd be really interested to hear if people are using that in any other extreme situations. So dehydration, it is really, really tough to keep up with their losses. There are so many ways in which they do lose water. And it's really important to try to sort out what they actually need for replacement. We do keep dry packs of concentrated electrolytes, but oftentimes the first loss, incidental loss, is really water, and they become more concentrated. And so just drinking, the instinct is that they need electrolytes. And that's what most people will say. I'm going to open up my electrolyte packet, and I'll go, hold on, get as much fresh water as you can in initially until your urine color changes, et cetera. So my only tools out there for assessment right now, we're getting some strips built, but the best tools I have right now are the urinal. So I actually have the rowers that I'm in a good working relationship with leading up to the row. For several weeks ahead of time, I have them pee in a bottle and mark it with a Sharpie, because I want to know what their baseline volume is. I want to they take pictures of it. I want to know the baseline color. So that gives them a baseline at which they can actually measure against, compare against while they're out there, and they take those urinals with them. And it's a really important tool that we have, and it's helped guide us a lot of times as to whether someone, crude as it is, it has been effective in guiding us even on water rationing and rescue decision making. And then again, as I mentioned, the per rectum rehydration as a backup plan. So what I have them do is take bottles of saline fleets with them as a reserve. Then if they have to use it, cleanse the bottle, and they can refill it if needed, the crew with them. And then Zofran as a dissolving sublingual, I always have that on board for them. So the other big area of concern is skin. You've probably heard about some of these conditions, but here's an example of Roz's hands. Not all rowers get this, and rowers experiment with different types of gloves, single, double layer gloves, gloves on, gloves off, even types of grips around the oars so that they can not have to have friction. The friction happens between the adaptive grip and the oar itself. So lots of work being done around this, but there are other areas where skin is a huge problem. Number one is the bum. They're putting a lot of pressure and friction on their butt. They get saltwater crystals in their clothes. That's why some of them row naked, to be honest. They find it more comfortable. But also some are using 2 layers, so like runner's socks where you can glide between the layers and not have friction against the skin. The problem though is they lose a tremendous amount of muscle and fat. And so especially in the legs, ironically, these rowers are different than crew, where their legs are really strong and big. They lose muscle mass in their legs because their legs are basically stabilizers. They're in footholds, but they're basically stabilizers. The pedals are rudders, if they have that kind of a system hooked up, but they're not really driving like they do in crew. So you'll see a huge difference. They stabilize because the ocean is so unpredictable, and one oar may be in the water one time and not the other. So you'll see tremendous wasting in the glutes, particularly in the quads, in the hams, and also in the calf muscles. So you can imagine how that exposes the ischial tuberosities. And they develop not just skin problems, but as you know, most decubitides start deep, and before they come to the surface, there's a lot of tissue breakdown deep. That's true for these rowers as well. Then they also end up with bacterial infections, which are quite significant. So when they come back to shore, there's a nickname for this called pizza butt. And there are just massive sores on some of these individuals. And I probably have the worst collection of photos of most colleagues I know who do sports medicine. But it's important for us to be able to even measure. So once on shore, we can decide, do they need antibiotics? Are they improving on their own? It's just very, very hard for them to minimize friction, get rid of salt, do good hygiene. But cleansing with clear water each evening or each shift, is absolutely fundamental to minimizing this problem, and then creating a pseudo friction layer that doesn't involve your skin. There are lots of seat pads that are designed. The seat does travel, but it doesn't travel the same way. The ocean, as you can imagine, makes those seat travelers unpredictable, and oftentimes the wheels just shear off. So there are lots of issues around the skin. Every skin fold stays moist. It's very hard to keep dry when you're on deck and rowing. And that creates, of course, a lot of tinea. The tinea then can turn into staph infections. So we're treating both. We're always anticipating what's going to be the next progression, and how do we have that on board in the medical kit for them, and how do we get them to it early. A lot of them just get used to suffering, and so they're late to complain, or they're late to address something. They feel like they just have to endure it. So we've seen some pretty nasty infections once people come to shore that you just look at and you're like, how did you not mention that? Or how did you live with that? But they're enduring so much. Musculoskeletal, neurovascular, there is tremendous muscle and bone wasting, as we've talked about, but there are other issues that are less obvious. There's a flexor tenosynovitis that happens in the digits because they're gripping the oar just continually. And what happens is the flexor tendons, for some of you who've looked at the diagrams, Netter diagrams of the hands, you know, there are these elaborate pulley systems and sheaths. So the tendons, there's not much tolerance for swelling in the tendons. You've heard about the infectious flexor sheath tendon. That's really bad, but these are mostly inflammatory, not infectious, but they're disabling. They cannot straighten their fingers. It's too painful. And it's interesting that when they come back to land and rehydrate, that sometimes in the first week, it gets excruciatingly painful to the point where we have to use a lot of anti-inflammatories, steroids, ice baths, etc. But the flexor tenosynovitis is quite significant. And then multiple overuse syndromes. And you can just imagine where those are, but how difficult they are. It's life and death. If you get an impingement syndrome or rotator cuff tendonitis and you can't row, for instance, get a discitis in the lumbar spine. So these things are really important. On the neurologic side, as I mentioned, there's an adaptation that happens to really get you to tolerate the moving horizon and the motion of the boat and the mismatch of signals. But that adaptation for that doesn't play well when you get back to land. So when they get back to land, they are like astronauts. They have that same neurovestibular balance that they have to accommodate to. So a very big problem is stepping off the boat and in that motion or on the dock actually falling. And this had created some significant injuries. So it takes a while for that to be corrected. And the other part of that that's complicating that is the orthostatic hypotension, because they're almost always hypovolemic when they come to shore. I think everyone here probably knows what that is, but I was a PT for 10 years before I became an orthopedic surgeon. And it's just this phenomenon that is so profound, no matter how in shape you are, this standing up, the pooling of the volume in the lower extremities, and it's worse when people are underhydrated. So we see it a lot post-surgery. So these are some really important things to think about. And then there are issues around mental health. And your circadian rhythms get terribly disturbed. And a lot of it is if you're on a rowing pattern where So the solo rowers, they have no one else, and they have to figure out how do they not lose ground when they rest. So most of them don't sleep 8 hours. They actually row a few hours, rest a few hours. So the pairs I said, 2 up, 2 down, it all depends on the shifts and how your group or your team decides to do it. But no matter what happens, you have circadian rhythm disturbances, because if you have storms in the middle of the night, or you have fear episodes in the middle of the night, whatever it is, the sleep disturbances are just really significant, like they are in space. So the circadian rhythms do get disturbed in a different way than they do from space, but that makes a profound effect on their physiology. They also have to basically ignore them. They can't find the optimal cardiovascular time to row. Like, we know it's a terrible cardiovascular timing in terms of compensatory mechanisms to do cardiac rehab at 8 in the morning. I used to run cardiac rehab, but I was doing a master's in cardiac physiology and circadian rhythms. And I found out we were putting these poor people on treadmills at the time they were least able to create compensation cardiovascularly. So you can't change that when you're out there. You've got to do whatever you've got to do through wherever you are in the rhythm. But we know it's having effects, and we need to study that more. The sleep deprivation, you can imagine, greatly drains your energy, cumulative fatigue, but tolerance to adversity. And that's one of the ways people survive, is adaptability and resilience. And that really goes down with sleep deprivation, but it also creates delirium. So they're not making nearly as good choices. And then add to that isolation, depression, etc. There are many who stay in touch, upload to social media, blogs, pictures, videos at night, but it is still lonely and scary out there for a big chunk of it. And then others are driven by inspiration. And these things are really important when you're the medical officer trying to figure out if a person is somewhat psychically frozen. How can you help motivate them through a place like that? Because it is life-threatening that they can keep functioning. And so this is an example. Many rowers have people they're rowing for or causes they're rowing for. And it's good to know the whole person before you send them out and say, I'm going to help you with your health and safety. It's really important for them to have mentors. Here's Roz. This is Great Pacific Race. I'm over here doing medical training with this 4-man crew. They set a world record that year. This is a 4-women crew. They also set a world record, but it really helps to talk to other people who've gone before. Some of it's folklore, but it actually is really helpful to see other people, like for us in medical training, who've gone before and have been successful. And being well-trained matters, being of the right stuff matters, being able to manage the greatest fear you've ever had in your life. And this was a pair of women who were fantastically fit, totally capable, but we were not able to anticipate this panic attack that one of them had. And it was close to shore, but they got out into a fog bank. And for the first time ever, they realized this is what it's going to be like to not see land for 3 to 4 to 5 months. And that just undid this person who had trained for a year. So we did go out and do a rescue, bring her back, but it was an absolute no-go situation. And it was just great that she was in boat range, because range from shore makes a big difference in our rescue plan. Let's see the time. We doing okay for time? Yeah,
yep, we're good. Yep.
Okay. So as I said, lost at sea is uncommon, but happens. Mostly we see medical conditions, injuries, etc. There were 7 lost at sea when I first put this talk together. And I told you in the past year, we've lost 2 more rowers, quite sadly. It's interesting that the boats typically make it to shore. They're on the surface. They're susceptible to the winds and currents. And the bodies, of course, usually sink, and we often never see the bodies again. And it's very hard on the families. The boats are designed to not sink, and they usually don't sink unless the hatches are damaged or the boat itself is damaged, or they're somehow not well planned or well built, or an undetected injury, because a lot of these boats get handed down to the next rower. And a lot of people like to row a boat that successfully crossed an ocean. Problem is there are stresses on these boats, and without FEA, finite element analysis on all of them, there'll be undetected cracks, etc. So, but they are usually very safe and stable boats. So staying with the boat is your best strategy for survival. Getting separated from the boat is one of the biggest threats to life. And the second biggest threat is the boat capsizing and creating either injury or a lack of self-righting, where the boat doesn't right itself. So how do rowers and boats get separated? I think it's a really important thing to think about. It sounds like, how on earth could that, it seems so preventable, but think of the conditions. First of all, you're facing backwards. So you don't get to pick which way the swells are coming from. And, if you've been out, you're a water skier or fisherman, whatever, you know that when a boat wake from another boat comes, you want to get 90 degrees to that wake. Or if you're a surfer going out, you know which way you want to be facing to cut through a wake. You can't choose that. Oftentimes you can't even see it when you're rowing. So first of all, they're facing backwards. So that puts them at risk. Another is they have to get out and actually do things. They've got to clean the barnacles off the boat. It creates tremendous drag across several months. They've got to go out and fix lines, cut lines, etc. This is part of that video I was showing earlier. So they have to get off the boat. So what's interesting is it's really a tough battle to get them to tether. And it took me a long time with Roz to do that. There's this resistance to that. And you'll see why some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't, but we're getting better and better at talking rowers into tethering. First of all, any tether is a tripping hazard. If you trip over your tether, whether it's a surf leash or what you've designed, you're going to throw yourself in the drink. So, or you're going to crash into some part of the boat, the metal track, cause a laceration. All those things happen. So it's tethering, but it's a tough sell sometimes. So this is Leah Ditton. This was I think this is a row down the coast before she took off to go to Hawaii. And one of the other things that happens is you can have bad weather or good weather, and you can have rough seas in either, and you can have rogue waves that come out of nowhere, and those will crash over the top of your boat. You can just get washed right off your seat. And that's a very common scenario that gets described, and it's terrifying for the rowers initially, and especially if they get washed off and they start to see their boat drift away, because you cannot catch up to it. This happened to Roz, very, very good weather down by the equator. And she didn't relay the story to her mother or myself until she was 12 hours safely back on the boat, because she knew we would want to kill her if she hadn't died, because we said over and over, tether, tether, tether. Here's the bimini back here that we created, and it just rolls across horizontally. But again, the World Record Society, Ocean Rowing Society, considered that a threat to her record, but we were able to negotiate with them regarding safety. And this happens, they roll over. A big wave can do this. Now, what you want to think about is that when this happens, that's a heavy boat, because it's filled with equipment, et cetera, and supplies. Any part of that could badly injure you. So one reason people don't like to tether is they feel like it puts them in harm's way if the boat does flip. We have had people with, we did a couple helicopter rescues. One was for a fractured wrist, one was for a fractured shoulder. Both of those were from rollovers. But what should happen, if it should happen, you stay with the boat, but the boat should right itself, because the whole bottom part of it should be filled with ballast. And usually it's fresh water to begin with. And as you need the fresh water, you replace it with salt water to maintain the right ballast of the boat. I always recommend a pre-launch rollover test so that you know for sure, because this is one of the reasons we had to rescue Roz by helicopter, was a badly ballast boat. So anyway, separating from the boat, or the boat capsizing and not righting itself. Because what happens with that is you can get injured, but you can get absolutely exhausted and not be able to get back on the boat. So we talk a lot about tethers. We also talk a lot about helmets. One other reason rows have had to end and near life loss was because of big scalp lacks and concussions. So even inside the cabin, you're like a tennis shoe in the dryer and you're banging around in the cabin. So we recommend helmets, but we can't always get them to wear them. Of course, emergency deployable life vests, beacons, etc. But in addition, they have immersion suits if they have enough time to put the immersion suit on. So what's happening is we're getting rowers of different skill sets because people are selling seats on these pay-per-seat rowboats now. So like a team of 4, boat fully equipped, you pay this money, show up, we'll get you across the ocean. And it's a bit like what's happening with commercial space travel, where the qualifiers are, can you write a big enough check? So we're getting people of different substrates going into these high risk environments. And that's going to put a burden on those of us like you and myself who are interested in helping medical management in extreme environments. The other thing that's really challenging is you not only have uneven skill sets, unfamiliar with equipment, conditions, et cetera, but the team dynamics can be absolutely random and can be actually disastrous. So I think it's a really important thing to think about the higher risk nature of these pay-per-seat boats. This is one that actually had a great outcome. It was a world record, but in the end, several of these people don't speak to each other. Now, ironically, this gentleman over here on the right, Cyril, is designed a kayak, and I'm his medic. He's going to row from San Francisco, a paddle from San Francisco to Hawaii, wants to try it kayaking this time. And his colleague over here is going to be doing it in a rowboat, in a solo rowboat. He didn't get enough himself, Carlo. So all of these people have different reasons for doing this, but from a medical standpoint, we want to keep thinking about the outcomes, the risks, et cetera. Let me skip past this. These are the 2 guys, Chris and Mick, came in. I'm only showing you this to highlight why we have to even think about finishing conditions. So as they come in, we've got to really understand what condition they're in. They are depleted. These 2 almost died. We had to do an airdrop of food a week offshore, threatened a record, but since no one else had ever done it, they got a record anyway. But neither one could lift their head anymore. They rowed from Japan. They meant to be out there 4 months. They were out there 6 months, and they literally could not raise their heads anymore. So this is the condition they're coming in. So I always say, I take a boat out if I'm the medic, and I want to see them a few miles offshore. So I know what system to have onshore. Do I need ambulances? Do I need to notify the emergency room? What do I need to bring with me to meet them? How am I going to assess them, et cetera? So the finish line considerations are significant. People celebrate by throwing flares up and holding flares up, and flare burns are one of the most significant problems we've seen, ironically. So just because they're coming in and everyone's ready to relax, I'm the most nervous at that point, because all of a sudden we have these unexpected things happening, and the family and the press are there. And these people are no longer thinking straight, because most of them row all night the last night just because they're on such a high. So the reentry process, I talked about stepping ashore and the neurovestibular disturbances. They're weak. Their legs are really, really weak. They also have orthostatic hypotension. They also want to immediately, after they recover a little bit, I mean, most of them want to drink alcohol as soon as they land, but we try to get water in them. But the next thing is they also, after a few days, they want to work hard again. They have ideas that they already have plans to run a marathon in 3 months. It's the worst idea ever. So I counsel them before they leave. Let's look at your 6 month to 1 year schedule for when you return, because they take a long time to regain muscle, regain bone, etc. The neurovestibular stuff clears within a few days typically, and the hydration, etc. Let me keep going here because we're just about out of time. And maybe we are, because it won't advance. So what I'm saying now is you got to have a medical plan in place, but you're only one part of the team. You've got to work with the race director, safety officer, your outer circle of support, Coast Guards, et cetera. And you have to have communication logs that are color coded for rate of severity. I just put an example over here that we have all these levels of alarm and alert. And for rowing, it's tough because there are only certain distances that you can send a boat out, that you can send a helicopter out. Otherwise, then you've got to start figuring out what's the closest ship and how many days will it take to reach them. So those are part of the challenges. We build the medical kit, we do pre-training. I teach them how to staple themselves, even suture themselves. We do lots of training depending on what level they're at. I do try to deploy technologies. These look really simple, but before I started doing this, many of these things weren't even on the boats. And so this has been a step up, but where I'm really looking is more and more towards remote medical diagnostics. I'd love to send one of these units out, but I have sent LiveCore, Cardia 6 lead, FDA approved. It actually got used by Carlo. I was getting PDFs of his EKG in the middle of the ocean because he did go with a concern about arrhythmias before he left. So we're moving forward. We're looking at multi-parametric and multiplex devices now. Area I'm super interested in, but you know, for any of the conditions that we want to detect an early deflection, right the ship, so to speak, before they get in a clinical scenario, we're going to need multi-parametric information. Here's a company I'm very interested in what they're doing. I've sent several of these devices down to Antarctica now, and we're introducing them in our health sense matrix paradigm for space. And again, remote medical testing. Here's a very interesting thing. They all have cameras out there, and a colleague of mine is leveraging AI to actually quantify muscle and fat loss, and we're moving towards quantifying hydration and even bone loss compared to the gold standard of DEXA for these things. So these capabilities are coming. This is a fatigue analytics platform leveraging multiple data streams plus AI, not just predicting, not just detecting fatigue, but predicting 10 days to 2 weeks out who's going to have a severe fatigue episode. And if you're a solo rower or even a pair and you're out there by yourself and your life depends on it, you want to know, am I setting myself up for massive fatigue episode downstream? What can I do to change that? What corrections can I make? So these are in-mission corrections and precision corrections. I say the ocean rowers come back as a cross between a prisoner of war and an astronaut. And indeed, in my work with astronauts, I've proposed ocean rowing as an analog for space. And there are several parallels you can already tell in your own minds what those might be. But basically, as we're going out towards Mars, which is our mission within 10 years, we are going to a zone where it is completely untethered from Earth, a very different model than telemedicine on ISS, delayed comms, but it's actually totally asynchronous. We need closed loop processes, no resupply, no deorbit, which means no rescue, basically, much more radiation and confined space for longer periods. So the models, you can see the overlap, and the goal is to get the right information at the right time so the individual and their overseeing group can make the right choices. Whether you're in a high resource healthcare system, whether you're in the middle of the ocean, or whether you are hundreds to millions of miles away from Earth, we're all looking for this informed health model. And I think that's what the lessons we're bringing back from this kind of experience are. Thank Roz, thank Chris, thank Leah, and I thank the Ocean Rowing Society, but basically trying to push hard for more medical data to be gathered. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so, so much, Dr. Sawyer. That was an amazing talk. If you have maybe just 5 or 10 minutes, I can pass it over to Leo for a question or two.
Yeah, I'm delighted to stay. Sorry, it went a bit long.
No, it was captivating. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Sawyer. So if anyone has questions they'd like to ask, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them. Any that we don't get to, if Dr. Sawyer is willing, we can send afterwards. So the first question was from Shilpi, and it was, as the expedition medic, are you on site during the journey?
So on site's an interesting question. So I'm not on the boat, and we don't have support boats going along. So I am on site in terms of very much like through the whole pandemic, basically. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but these rowers row unsupported in terms of not having escort boats. Now, for the Great Pacific Race, we sent an escort boat, but they were usually several days away from any boat because they're all spread out across the ocean. And they're not there for resupply, but in terms of true emergencies. But as the expedition medic, I'm usually operating remotely. Oh, excuse me 1 second. Let me answer that. I do the pre-launch physical and training, and I do an intake anytime I can. So if I can get, so I make 5 flights across to Hawaii during that summer race, et cetera. And for Roz, when she did the Indian Ocean, it was so hard on her, and she was out there for 5 months that I made sure I was on site for a medical intake at Mauritius, which was the finish line. So that intake that's why I spent a little time at the finish line issue, because the medical intake there, if I'm not present, I train up a local physician, make sure the local resources. So I didn't answer that thoroughly the first time, sorry.
That was perfect. Thank you, Dr. Sawyer.
All right, our next question is from Kayla, and she was wondering, how often do these rowers end up hyponatremic, and how do you treat this on the boat?
It's a really good question. So that's why we're super excited about more remote clinical lab capabilities to understand that, I mean, there's so much information to be gained from what I call the body's exhaust, which is our sweat, our urine, our feces, our breath, not just our blood. Just like your car, mostly when they diagnose your car, it's what they're getting out of the tailpipe that tells how efficiently the engine's running. So we need to capture our body's exhaust and the meaning that's coming out of it. If we do that, and capabilities are coming, we'll learn more about how to understand the electrolyte replacement needs of an individual. Sodium's not so hard to replace. It's hard to know how to do that in a dosed fashion and what they actually need. But I often rely on urine concentration. They have dipsticks, they have color, they have volume. I don't mean to horrify any of you who are thinking, oh, really? That seems pretty gross and crude. It is, but what we're doing is working our way towards more and more specific and validated tools.
Thank you. All right, our next question comes from Carla from UManchester. And they're wondering, how would you compare long distance rowing with long distance sailing from a medical perspective?
That's a really great question. There is a woman in Barcelona who is, I would consider her the top dog in terms of ocean sailing medicine. But the difference is that these people have to, they have no other source of power. So if they are not physically able to perform, they're stuck. And that's a big difference between sailing and rowing. Sailing, other than, I'm not saying sailing's not physical, but when you can't perform, you can try to leverage the wind and the physics around that. So that's one big difference to me. There are all kinds of small sailing boats that have made it across, some really interesting stories about that. But so I'm not saying it's size of boat. It's more to me that you have no other source of power than your own ability to perform. So your physical capabilities are absolutely crucial. In terms of medical records from sailing and rowing and comparing who's at risk for what kinds of conditions, we don't have good records on that. And I'm actually very interested in working with the sailing medical community on that. So, because obviously some of the exposures are very similar, but there are certain things fundamentally that are different.
All right, our next question comes from Shilpi again. And how does medical evacuation work exactly in these situations?
So first of all, we have a core team, and you have to create your line of command from the very beginning, early on, before the launch, of who makes what decisions. Because the worst thing in the world is to create confusion. The rower can activate the Coast Guard. They can bypass all of us. It's not usually what we recommend, but that has happened a couple of times. The way it happens usually is that the safety officer, medical officer, and director, race director, will come to a consensus about whether the rower wants to be rescued or not. Often they refuse rescue. So that's a really interesting scenario to work with. And you have to sort out, have they hit their head? Are they thinking straight? Are they out of whack electrolyte wise, or dehydration, so they're delirious? So you have to sort that out. But refusing rescue is the most common thing we hear from rowers, not I want to be rescued. So we have a decision tree. The problem, as I said before, is distance from shore and conditions. So Roz had to be rescued off of Northern California coast. What happened was her sea anchor really basically tore off, and she was in, I think it was 40 to 50 foot seas. That's like a 5-story building coming at you. If you can't get the boat perpendicular and it's parallel, it's like a freight train hitting you. So the sea anchor keeps you aligned in a safe way, not just keeps you from losing the miles you rode, but it really keeps you protected in waves. So she was just getting battered. She had hit her head badly several times. We already suspected that she was concussive and not thinking right. And so a rescue was called for her. A Coast Guard boat went out that was 70 to 80 feet long. They said, it's too dangerous for us. We're turning back. So they left her out there in a 23-foot boat, and they turned their 80-foot boat and went home because it was too dangerous. So we got a helicopter out there, but it was at the very edge of range. So the helicopter has to have enough fuel to get out, spend time to do the rescue, and then turn around and get all the way back. And they were at the very edge of fuel. And they finally said to her, all our lives are at stake. If you don't agree to this rescue right now, we have to leave you here. So she finally agreed. But interestingly enough, her biggest fear was jumping off of her rowboat. She had her immersion suit. She had her computers and cameras in Pelican cases. But it was the worst feeling in the world because that boat was her home and her safety, and where she, in the middle of all this ocean chaos, she still felt safer there than jumping off and waiting for the ladder.
Thank you. So I think we'll do one more question before we wrap up. And so this one comes from Ashley Adams, and she was wondering, in your experience, how many of these expeditions end in rescue versus successful finishes?
Well, that's interesting. We should be able to track that through the Rescue Society. I'll look that number up, but in my own just anecdotal experience, the rescue rate, let me just frame this. If there are to be rescues, like in a group event where they all launch within a day or so, it's almost always sorted out within the first couple of weeks. And these are several month journeys. So most of our rescues happen in that first range. Some of them we can actually sort out on shore and predict, but my experience is it's fewer than 25%. But I'm sorry, I don't have that. I'm going to see if I can find that stat. We should be able to track that. The problem is the Ocean Rowing Society, they don't do a good job on tracking failed attempts. Unless they make it a significant distance, but they're looking at crossings. Part of that database we need to do better on. But thank you for that question. I'm going to look at it. It will probably help us triage or develop a triage system better.
Thank you again so much, Dr. Sawyer, and thanks everyone for coming. If you have any lingering questions, feel free to send them through to us, and we will post the answers on the website if Dr. Sawyer is willing to answer them later. And we hope to see you all next week for Global Medicine. Have a good night.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to meet anyone who wants to reach out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sawyer. That was truly an amazing talk. Like, blew my mind to speak on behalf of everybody. Ocean rowing is just a sport I didn't even know existed. That's amazing.
Jump in, the water's fine.
I don't know if I'm cut out for it, but maybe somebody that came today is inspired to do it.
Yeah, or talk to me about space medicine. Take care.
Yes, that too. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.